Detours. Brought to you by Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. Over the past few decades, the adaptive sports world has witnessed an emergence of a hybrid sports played on a court. The dynamic and fast-paced sport of team wheelchair handball is now on the rise in the U.S., and the 2024 USA team went to Cairo, Egypt, coached by Dyke, and they came home with a second-place podium finish at the World Championships. Welcome, Ford.
Thank you, Bob. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate the invitation.
Hey, Ford, let's jump right in. So I saw that you talked a lot about, the opportunity to coach this team and how quickly everything had to come together, not just financially, but in every way imaginable to get the team to Cairo, Egypt. Talk about that opportunity and what it was like and how hard it was to put a team together.
To provide a little bit of context, I want to step just a little bit back into how this all came about, because it does seem maybe from the outside a little bit random if you're not within my first and second degree of separation. So my phone rang in 2023 in November around my birthday, and I was headed on vacation. It was a former teammate of mine, and he said, "Hey, have you heard of the sport wheelchair handball?" And I assumed he was going to say basketball because I've been a part of Auburn's program since 2012 as a grad student. And I said, "No, but hey, I'm about to hop on a plane for a vacation. Can I get back to you?" He said, "Well, before you go, it's a sport that emerged a while back, but it wasn't until 2022 until the first World Championships was hosted in Cairo, Egypt as well. There were 6 teams. And the U.S. was thinking about fielding a team for the upcoming 2024 World Championships, again in Cairo, Egypt." So I said, "Sounds interesting, but again, let me get back to you." So fast forward to December, jumped on the phone with him again. Then by January, February, this is now 2024, giving iterations to our national governing body as to the vision I had for how successful I thought we could be on the world stage in a very quick period of time. And then they requested on April Fool's Day for me to send in a proposal, essentially. So what does it look like from a training standpoint? Where will you recruit your athletes? What about equipment? What type of funding, partnerships, to your question about all of that? And so I sent that in, and, full disclosure, I didn't go too heavy into the output because I had so much other stuff going on, and I did a good job, I thought, but I wasn't really thinking much about it. And then 45 days of radio silence. May 16th, my phone rings again, and I was told that we received the wild card for Cairo, Egypt in September 2024, and they wanted to appoint me as the head coach because they didn't know anyone else that had wheelchair-specific experience as well as team handball converged into one. So I was an athlete from 13 to 20, and I just felt like it was 2 worlds that were always separate. But once it converged, I just put my foot further down on the gas, and I had to find as much support, as many resources as possible, from staff to funding to all the partnerships to get us to where I thought we could go.
Ford, we're going to jump way ahead now just a little bit, just because of what you were talking about, fielding, such a young team to Cairo. So you guys show up, and the teams that are there are Brazil, Egypt, Chile, India, Japan, Portugal, and you guys, the United States. Was there an expectation level, or do you think that you caught anybody by surprise coming in there and getting that second place podium finish?
I'll answer it by a press release, Bob, that was written on us. So I show up and they wanted to interview me. The IHF media wanted to interview me, and they said, "Coach, what is your plan? What is your vision?" Kind of like the question you're asking. And I quickly answered it with all of the confidence that I had. And not only our athletes, our staff, myself, the organization, the friends, the family, all the support around us. I said, "We will play in the final match. We will play for gold." And literally, I physically saw the eyebrows of the media representatives raise. And so about 2 days go by, and they posted an article after we played Brazil in our first opening match, which we got the wheels kicked off of us. I mean, we scored in the first 15 seconds and never scored again for 19 minutes and 45 seconds. So it's kind of like a, haha, here's the U.S. again, just being arrogant and naive and, maybe egotistical. They're going to finish in 8th because we invited them to be a placeholder. And then you fast forward through the tournament, and all we did was continue to rise when it comes to our level of play. And we just stayed with the vision. We always came back to the table. We always utilized film and film study. We used data analytics. I leveraged my 2 Olympians on my staff. I leveraged all of the support we had to make sure that these athletes continued to chip away and to stay within that process-oriented approach until we played in that final match.
So just as with the sports like basketball and rugby and so many other, there's a classification system, 4.0 being the maximum player. So I noticed right away that, they mentioned that this sport was really farmed from basketball, tennis, football. So in essence, this is a hybrid sport.
Correct. And that was the main intention for how we recruited the athletes that we did. I always saw tennis being a translational sport with the tennis serve and throwing a handball overhead. I saw basketball with the court dynamics and the spacing and the transition play, crossing and transition. I saw rugby, obviously, with how you can use high-level chair contact and chair positioning to gain advantages. And also even the sport of wheelchair American football. One of my goalies who, without him, we're not winning against Brazil in the semifinal. He brought so much to the table. And I think that the variety of experience within our athletes, but also the openness of our staff to allow our athletes to kind of guide us along the way. We were all able-bodied and are all able-bodied staff members. And I'm the only one that's been directly involved with wheelchair sports from 2012 on. So my whole vision was, we know what we're talking about from a team handball specific standpoint and some wheelchair basketball, some wheelchair tennis based on our experience. But really, this is your team. And I said that to the athletes from the start. We want to make sure that we're opening up the opportunity for you as much as possible.
So what percentage of the players out there were from basketball? Was it a predominantly basketball world that you farmed from?
Well, thankfully, my connections with Coach Rob Taylor here at the University at Auburn and his connections through US Wheelchair Basketball, of course, that was definitely the most salient way to get as many athletes as possible. It made the most sense for us. But we also saw quickly that wheelchair tennis would be a nuanced approach and wheelchair track and field because of the speed and agility. So it wasn't necessarily let's only go for wheelchair basketball athletes, although to your question, we did think that there would be a high level of translation from one sport to the next. We wanted to keep it as open as possible because anyone that is athletic and dynamic enough, in our opinion as a staff, could pick this sport up relatively quickly with the right guidance and the right motivation and discipline moving forward.
Okay, so just so that we can get to a point of understanding with how the whole scoring takes place with wheelchair handball. So I noticed that there's two halves. They're both 10 minutes long. You have a 5-minute intermission or break. So I just went to the game against Egypt for the gold medal. First half, you guys were outscored 6-1, and then in the second half, it was 12-6. So is the final score of the game then 18-7, or is it split up into halves? So if U.S. wins one half and Egypt wins the other half, do you play another quarter or another period? How does scoring take place?
Wheelchair handball was derived from the indoor and the beach discipline from the able-bodied perspective. So it takes indoor nuances, and the beach nuance is going to be the two sets. So it isn't necessarily two halves. It's set one, break, set two. And if you tie after the first two sets, you go into a third 5-minute set. So the score, to answer your question, in that final match against Egypt, which, full disclosure, I've put behind me in the rearview mirror, but it was 6-1, 12-6. So that's 2-0. 2 Egypt, 0 US. But if you go back to our silver medal match against Brazil, it was 1. They won the first one. We won the second one. We go to a tie. It was tied after the third, which is why we went to shootout, and then extended shootout, sudden death, to where we ultimately won that game.
Hey, one really interesting aspect of the game that I noticed was something called the spectacular goal. And, much like the 2-point play in football, when you're trying to get just those extra points on the board. So there are 3 ways to get what's called a spectacular goal or a 2-pointer. You can make a 360 move with one hand, and I saw someone do that. It's a pretty incredible move. Another is goal to goal. So if the goalie throws it and he gets it in the goal, there's another 2-pointer. And the third way is to shoot the 7-meter or the 23-foot-ish shot. Is that used a lot? Is that something that you work into your game, that you kind of have an anticipation of when you will or won't use it?
You most definitely have to know how to perform those movements in order to play the statistical game around, hey, you may play fast, you may play dynamic, but if you're only scoring 1 pointers all game, this other team maybe doesn't have to be as fast or as dynamic, and they can shoot 2 pointers and get ahead of you. So you have to have a multifaceted, dynamic approach to how you set your gameplay, but also how you train your athletes, because they have to be able to do everything. They got to be Swiss Army knives when it comes to pressure situations, especially.
We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Sports and Spokes magazine. For nearly 50 years, they've produced stories on iconic athletes performing at the top of their game, given generational coverage of sports dating back to the 1970s, and they've shown the way with exciting and timeless magazine cover shots. To stay on top of all the latest news from the world of high performance adaptive sports, go to sportsandspokes.com. Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. There's so many, like I said right off the top, that there's more and more court games coming into play now. And, probably if you look back into the 70s, people may have laughed or scoffed at rugby. And now look at rugby now. It's probably one of the premier sports in the Paralympics. So here we go. We got 2028 coming up. It's right around the corner. It's maybe only, 3.5 years away. And you guys are talking about this. What is it that you think that you/the Federation for Handball, what is it that you're going to have to do or convince the IPC of that this is a viable sport to have in the Paralympics?
It's a great question, Bob. And one of the early visions when my phone rang initially in 23 was, how do we get to LA? How do we get to Brisbane? What are the steps along the way? And as of today, unfortunately, it will not be on the Paralympic docket for LA 28. However, the asterisk, the footnote at the bottom of that says they want to do a demonstration to get it into 2032 Brisbane, Australia. And if you look at the calendar, while that may seem far away, from a layman's standpoint, we know in these quads, it happens quick. So our goal right now is to push out to 2026, win the gold, and then move into 28, which would be a Paralympic showcase exhibition to then set us up for the forthcoming World Championships and then be on the Paralympic docket from an IPC standpoint for Brisbane, Australia 2032.
So that being, as you get to the point where it could potentially become a Paralympic sport, will you have to be a part of a committee? Have you already joined a committee or started to work in that process?
Yeah, so to be clear, and so your audience is aware of the structuring of all of this, we reside underneath USA Team Handball Federation. So USATH is our national governing body. We were the third iteration of the sport added. The nice thing about that is they have an inclusive atmosphere. So you have the men and the women competing from a junior and a senior level, both in indoor, which is the first discipline, beach is the second discipline, and we're a co-ed sport as the third discipline of wheelchair handball. But I just want to flex a little bit and show the pride that I have for not only our staff, but definitely our athletes. Out of the entire history of the organization, we are the only discipline across the sport, across the gender, sex, and across age that has medaled in a major international handball federation competition. So our silver medal is almost like a gold medal when it comes to the lever that we have and the position that we're in to get us to that next level from a Paralympic standpoint. We typically train at Auburn University. My relationship with Auburn Adapted Athletics coach Rob, of course, and here at the School of Kinesiology in the greater university, their doors are open. So we would have an upcoming training camp / tryout, most likely at the end of April, once wheelchair basketball nationals is over and wheelchair handball nationals is over, because my thought is try to get as many collegiate level athletes as possible that have just finished their season, and we can then go travel in the summer, whether that is to a Japan or said country, in order to have some friendly relations as we continue to build towards 26. Now, Team Canada, I've been speaking with their administration, and they're building a team as we speak. Like literally right now, they're starting to build. And my hope is that they host 26 World Championships, because I think it would just be a phenomenal thing for not only North America, but, selfishly for us not to have to travel too far, which would be nice, but also to get us into another stratosphere. And then for 28 to come around with about maybe 6 teams exhibition. And then, of course, by 32, I can already see it. I can feel it in my bones. I believe we'll be at that Paralympic docket.
Well, especially when you consider that the sport is truly still in its infancy, especially here in the U.S. But really, I want to thank you for it. I mean, we could probably sit here and break down classification and a lot of other rules that go into the sport, and maybe we can catch up again a little bit down the road. But outstanding performance in 2024. You guys went to Egypt. You came home with the silver. Egypt captured the gold, and Brazil got third. You have to be really proud of that. And, once again, outstanding job. And I really hope the sport has more and more growth as you go along.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Bob. And one of the things that we knew going in was if we were able to dethrone Brazil, they hadn't lost a set until they played us in that silver medal game. So we shocked the world when we did what we did to Brazil. And as we moved into that match against Egypt, I have the utmost respect for the host nation and what they were able to do. So my hat's tipped to them, but just know that we haven't even gotten started yet and we're coming for gold in 26.
Well done. Congrats. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Bob.